A foreign journalist asks a question. Brigitte Bardot turns toward him and says nothing. The press conference room in Paris goes quiet. Microphones still live, flashbulbs paused mid-fire. The silence will stretch for 18 seconds, and by the end of it, the journalist will lower his notebook without hearing an answer. Earlier that morning, the studio publicity team arrived at the venue 3 hours before the scheduled conference. They arranged the table at the front of the room, positioned microphones, tested the sound system. The chairs for journalists were set in neat rows facing the table. A backdrop with the film's title hung behind the chair where Bardot would sit. The venue was a hotel conference room near the Champs-Élysées, chosen for its central location and professional setup. The publicity team checked every detail: water glasses positioned precisely, ashtrays placed on the table, extra chairs along the walls in case attendance exceeded expectations. A young assistant tested each microphone by tapping it gently and listening for feedback. The press conference was organized for the promotion of her latest film, standard publicity protocol. The studio needed European press coverage, international distribution support, positive reviews before the premiere. These events were routine, controlled environments where questions could be managed and messages delivered. Journalists began arriving 90 minutes early. French cinema critics, entertainment correspondents from Germany, Italy, England, American magazine writers covering European film, photographers claiming positions along the sides of the room, checking light meters, loading film into cameras. They signed in at a table near the entrance, received press kits with production notes and glossy photographs. Some journalists knew each other from previous events and gathered in small clusters, discussing recent film releases and industry gossip. The atmosphere was professional but relaxed. This was familiar territory for everyone present. By the scheduled time, the room held 47 people, reporters with notebooks open, photographers with cameras ready, studio representatives standing near the back wall, monitoring the proceedings. The publicity director stood near the front, clipboard in hand, reviewing the approved list of attending press. The room smelled of cigarette smoke and coffee. A few journalists had brought their own coffee from the hotel lobby. Others smoked while waiting, tapping ash into the provided ashtrays. The morning light came through tall windows on the left side of the room, creating natural illumination that the photographers appreciated. Bardot enters the room and takes her seat at the table. Flashbulbs fire immediately. The sound of camera shutters fills the air for 8 seconds straight. She sits, adjusts the microphone slightly, and looks out at the assembled press. The photographers work quickly, capturing her from different angles. Some crouch low for upward shots. Others stand on chairs positioned along the sides for elevated perspectives. The firing of flashbulbs creates a strobing effect in the room, brief moments of intense white light followed by the afterglow in everyone's vision. The studio publicity director sits beside her. On her other side, the film's producer. Both men prepared to redirect difficult questions, to keep the conference focused on the film, to protect the investment. The publicity director has a typed sheet of approved talking points folded in his jacket pocket. The first question comes from a French film critic in the second row. He asks about her collaboration with the director. Standard opening question, safe territory. Bardot answers in French. Her response is polite, professional, brief. She mentions the director's vision, the script's complexity, the experience of working with the ensemble cast. The answer lasts 30 seconds. The journalists write in their notebooks using different methods, some in shorthand, others in longhand, a few using their own personal notation systems. The scratching of pens on paper creates a soft ambient sound beneath her voice. One photographer in the corner changes his film roll, the mechanical click of the camera back opening and closing briefly audible. The publicity director nods slightly. This is the rhythm they want. Professional responses, focus on the work, nothing controversial. The second question is about the filming location. Another routine inquiry. Bardot answers in 2 sentences. The journalists write in their notebooks. A British correspondent asks about her approach to the character. Bardot responds with technical details about preparation and rehearsal. The conference is proceeding exactly as the studio planned. 15 minutes pass, 8 questions asked and answered. The photographers have stopped firing constantly and now wait for significant moments. The room has settled into the familiar rhythm of a publicity event. Some journalists check their watches, calculating how much time remains. Others flip back through their notes, reviewing what's already been covered. The publicity director relaxes slightly in his chair. This is going well. The questions are focused on the film. The responses are quotable but safe. The studio representatives at the back of the room exchange satisfied glances. A foreign journalist in the fourth row raises his hand. The publicity director points to him, granting permission for the question. The journalist stands, as is customary in European press conferences. His suit is slightly rumpled, suggesting he's traveled recently to be here. His notebook is newer than those of the other journalists, the pages still crisp. He holds a pen in his right hand, ready to record whatever response comes. He speaks in English with a noticeable accent. His question is longer than the others, more statement than inquiry. He suggests that Bardot's fame exists mainly because of her appearance, rather than her talent as an actress. The phrasing is careful, but the implication is clear. The question is designed to provoke, to elicit a defensive response, to create a quote that will stand out from the routine coverage. Several journalists in the front rows pause their note-taking, sensing the shift in tone. A subtle tension spreads through the room. Some reporters look up from their notebooks. The photographers sense something shifting and raise their cameras. The publicity director's posture changes slightly, preparing to intervene. One photographer in the back adjusts his position, moving 2 steps to the left to get a clear shot of both Bardot and the foreign journalist. Another checks his light meter again, anticipating a moment worth capturing. The studio producer leans forward slightly, his hands moving to grip the edge of the table. Bardot hears the question and turns toward the journalist. Her movement is deliberate, unhurried. She locates him in the fourth row, standing with his notebook open. The room waits for her response. The expected pattern would be a defense of her work, a citation of her training, a reference to her body of performances, or perhaps a dismissal, a redirect to the film, a refusal to engage with the premise. The publicity director's hand moves slightly, ready to reach for the microphone if needed. Instead, she remains silent and simply looks at him. Direct eye contact across the distance of 4 rows. Her expression doesn't harden or soften. She simply observes him with complete attention. 5 seconds pass. The journalist waits, pen ready to write her answer. The publicity director leans slightly forward, preparing to step in if needed. The producer's grip on the table edge tightens imperceptibly. 10 seconds. Other journalists begin to notice the silence. A few turn in their seats to look at the foreign journalist, then back to Bardot. The photographers hold their positions, unsure whether to capture this moment. One photographer's finger hovers over the shutter button, frozen in indecision. The silence itself becomes a presence in the room. What started as a pause waiting for an answer transforms into something else, a response that isn't words, a statement that exists in the absence of statement. The ambient sounds of the room, the distant traffic outside, the quiet breathing of 47 people, the faint hum of the building's ventilation becomes suddenly audible. 15 seconds. The foreign journalist shifts his weight from his left foot to his right. His confidence, so present when he asks the question, begins to erode under her steady gaze. He clears his throat quietly. The sound carries in the silent room, amplified by the very quietness it tries to break. A journalist in the third row glances at his colleague beside him. They exchange a look but say nothing. Another reporter in the front row has stopped writing entirely, pen suspended above the page, watching. The silence grows longer. The room slowly becomes completely quiet. Earlier, there had been ambient sound, the rustle of papers, the quiet conversations between journalists waiting for questions, the click of cameras. Now there is only silence, and the awareness of it. The photographers lower their cameras slightly. This isn't a moment to photograph anymore, it's a moment to witness. One photographer at the side of the room takes a single shot, the shutter sound unnaturally loud in the quiet. Several heads turn toward the sound, then back to the front. The journalist hesitates and tries to repeat his question. His voice is quieter this time, less certain. He rephrases slightly, as if the problem was clarity rather than premise. But the confidence has drained from his delivery. His hand holding the pen trembles slightly as he speaks. The publicity director watches this unfold with a mixture of concern and fascination. This isn't in the protocol manual. This isn't something he can redirect or manage. The producer beside Bardot has frozen entirely, uncertain whether intervention would help or worsen whatever is happening. Bardot still says nothing. She hasn't looked away. She hasn't shifted in her chair. She hasn't signaled to the publicity director or the producer beside her. She simply maintains her attention on the journalist who asked the question. 18 seconds have passed since his question ended. In a normal conversation, 18 seconds of silence is an eternity. In a room with 47 people watching, it feels even longer. The journalist's face begins to show the strain, a slight flush rising in his cheeks, his jaw tightening. The journalist realizes that no answer is coming, that the question has been acknowledged by being witnessed, not by being dignified with a response. After several seconds more, he lowers his notebook slowly and sits back down in his chair. The chair creaks slightly as he settles into it. A French reporter in the front row immediately raises his hand. The publicity director points to him with visible relief, exhaling breath he didn't realize he was holding. The French reporter asks a question about the film's cinematography, returning the conference to safe professional territory. Bardot turns away from the foreign journalist and toward the French reporter. She answers his question in full sentences, her voice calm and measured, as if the previous exchange had not occurred. The transition is seamless, professional, complete, no acknowledgement of what just happened. No explanation or justification, simply a return to the work at hand. The room slowly exhales. Pens return to notebooks. Photographers adjust their positions. The ambient sounds of a functioning press conference resume, papers rustling, cameras clicking occasionally, the scratch of pen on paper. But something has shifted. The remaining questions are more carefully phrased. The journalists who speak next avoid anything resembling the provocation that preceded them. The atmosphere remains professional, but now carries an undertone of caution. The conference continues for another 20 minutes. 12 more questions are asked and answered. The foreign journalist does not raise his hand again. He takes notes on other responses but does not participate further. His posture has changed, shoulders slightly rounded, notebook held closer to his chest, less visible presence in the room. When the publicity director announces the final question, the photographers move forward for closing shots. Bardot stands, thanks the assembled press in both French and English, and exits through the side door. The entire event lasted 43 minutes. The room empties slowly. Journalists gather their materials, fold their notebooks, cap their pens. Small conversations resume about deadlines, about travel arrangements back to their home cities, about upcoming film festivals. But several conversations circle back to what happened, to the silence, to the question that received no answer. In the hallway outside, the foreign journalist is approached by two colleagues. They ask what happened, why she didn't answer. He says he doesn't know. He says she just looked at him. They ask if he felt he had asked something inappropriate. He says no, then hesitates, then says he isn't sure anymore. One of his colleagues suggests maybe the question was valid, but the framing was wrong. The other suggests maybe it wasn't the question at all. Maybe it was the assumption underneath it. The foreign journalist nods but doesn't respond. He's still processing what it felt like to be seen that way, to have his question acknowledged by being refused. The studio representatives gather near the elevator. The publicity director wipes his forehead with a handkerchief, the tension of the event now releasing. The producer lights a cigarette and takes a long drag. They agree the conference went well. Overall. They don't discuss the moment of silence directly, but it hangs in the air between them. The story of the exchange appeared in several European entertainment publications over the following weeks. Not as a scandal, not as a controversy, as an observation about what happens when a question reveals more about the asker than the subject. Some articles mentioned it briefly in their coverage of the press conference. Others devoted entire paragraphs to analyzing the moment. The foreign journalist's question was sometimes quoted, sometimes paraphrased, sometimes described without direct citation. But the silence was always mentioned. 18 seconds that became the story. The foreign journalist continued his career covering European cinema. But colleagues who knew the story would occasionally reference it when discussing interview technique. The question you ask says something about what you believe, and sometimes the answer is silence. Bardot never mentioned the press conference publicly. The film was released to strong reviews. Critics discussed her performance with serious attention to her technical skill and emotional range. The conversation shifted. What happened in that Paris press conference room wasn't dramatic. There was no argument, no walkout, no statement released afterward, just a woman who decided a question didn't deserve an answer, and a room that watched it happen. The foreign journalist's question was designed to reduce her to a single dimension. Her silence refused the reduction. 18 seconds that changed what the room understood about who held the power in the exchange. The publicity director told the story to other studio representatives. As a lesson, perhaps, or as a reminder that sometimes the subject of a press conference controls the room better than the handlers ever could. He added it to his mental catalog of moments that no amount of preparation can anticipate or prevent. What stayed with the people in that room wasn't the question. It was the silence, the length of it, the weight of it, the way it made a journalist sit down without getting an answer. Years later, some of those journalists would still remember the exact quality of that silence, not hostile, not dismissive, simply present and immovable. And the way Bardot moved on to the next question, as if nothing unusual had occurred, as if silence was a perfectly reasonable response to a question that mistook access for permission to diminish. This story is a historically inspired dramatization based on documented accounts of Bardot's interactions with international press during promotional events in the 1960s. Specific questions and private reactions are creative interpretations,